To go deeper into our episodes, please visit the show notes in your podcast app. Or, to get a fuller unedited experience, go find this episode on spotlightonpodcast.com. There, the notes are packed with links to resources that give you more about the people and topics explored here. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today, the spotlight shines on Brad Mindich, an entrepreneur who works directly with artists, athletes, and others in music, culture, and sports to expand their legacies and create powerful connections with their fans. Brad currently does this work as the founder and CEO of Inveniem Definitive Authentic, which helps its clients organize, catalog, present, and oftentimes monetize their archives directly to their fans. Brad has worked with the likes of Metallica, Def Leppard, Stephen Stills, basketball star Devin Booker, Monty Python co-founder Eric Idle, and many others. Our conversation took some fascinating turns, exploring the concept of pre-nostalgia, the longing for a future that was imagined in the past. We discussed the powerful impact of nostalgia on individuals and communities, and how it can evoke positive or negative emotions. We also talked about the cultural influences and connections between various subcultures, particularly Rastafarianism, with its historical and social roots in and connections to Hinduism and Indian immigrants. At its most basic, Brad's work is about preserving cultural heritage, something his family has actually contributed to. Brad's father owned the Boston rock station WFNX and was the longtime publisher of the Boston Phoenix, the fabled underground newspaper with roots stretching back to 1965.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. It's been a minute.
25 years or so. A lot of the intervening years in different work I've done is actually relevant to what you do now. So I think it'll inform the conversation in a really nice way. But would love to start off a little bit about where you come from, specifically what's your legacy and your on-ramp into music and entertainment.
I think the most relevant part, there's probably a couple of relevant parts that intersect and perhaps kind of led me to where I am today and being able to talk to you, is I did want to be a musician. That was my goal, as well as millions of other people. So there was a time period in my life when I was practicing the guitar for 8 hours a day, and I had super long hair and I chain smoked and all of that, and lived for that possibility, and which translated into me booking bands for a nightclub. And then my rock star dreams didn't quite turn out the way that I expected. But a critical part of my appreciation for music and the craft and the experience and the creators who do this on a level that is really so extraordinary and far superior to really anything that I would have been able to do. And I don't say that in any kind of critical way about myself or what have you. It just, there is such a level of talent that is so superior. And even I remember doing a whole guitar session studying thing at the Berklee College of Music for a while. And I had teachers that were a year older than me who were so amazing. There's a natural talent there. And I was somebody that just had to work really hard at it. At the end of the day, it did help shape me. But I think that in combination with growing up in the family business that I grew up in, which was in the media world, and specifically the Boston Phoenix and WFNX, which some of your listeners would be familiar with and perhaps some of them would not, but truly revolutionary in their impact as alternative weekly newspaper and an alternative radio station, playing those artists that nobody had heard of before, whether it's Bonner or Pearl Jam or the Smiths or Cure or Smashing Pumpkins, or the list goes on, but FNX being the ones that played it first, or the Boston Phoenix and the Village Voice being the first two alternative weekly newspapers in the country, that shaped a different way of thinking and reporting and connecting and what was meaningful to communities, different communities, whatever they might be, or political, social activism, arts, entertainment. And there's some very powerful things that sort of shaped how I saw the relationship between content and audience. And I think that's really the biography. Everything we do right now at Inveniem and Definitive is really, it is content and audience.
One bridge I was hoping you could help me cross is the connection between that sort of summary that you just gave of your biography and the family business, and not only the entertainment part of media, but the investigative journalism. I sort of broadly would put it in the bucket of like advocacy, not for any specific cause, but just for voices, whether it is in the arts or whether it's people in the community that needed to have someone on their behalf doing that kind of work. And I'm curious about the role your education played, your sort of formal secondary education, between that work and the work you do in the more commercial side of your life. Are there strands there? And if so, what are they?
I think it's a really insightful question. And there's certainly a thread or various threads that interconnect in some way, shape, or form. So I guess going back to kind of address some of the voices nature of what you mentioned, we talk about on the music side with FNX and some of those bands or artists or whoever that we brought to the world that wouldn't have had a chance to hear Nirvana for the first time, or whomever it might be from that particular genre, the alternative music genre that shaped and influenced culture. So you're talking about voices and you're talking about cultural connectivity and impact and appropriation and all sorts of interesting things like that. And then on the newspaper side, this is even more expansive in a lot of ways, just given the nature of the particular medium, in the sense that some of the things that popped into my head immediately is the Phoenix, when AIDS was, people were not paying attention to it the way they should have. So maybe this was, 83, 82, 83. The Phoenix put a safe sex kit into every newspaper, which included instructions on safe sex and included a condom and included all that. It was, nobody had ever done it. I can tell you the church in Boston was not particularly pleased with that, but it was that commitment to social awareness and seriousness of, we all know what AIDS wound up becoming in just a few short years. But I think it was that, or whether the Phoenix sponsored the Robert Mapplethorpe exhibit, which again, people lost their minds from the conservative side, but these were missions we had to do, right? It was just the nature of our DNA from the investigative journalism side. And the last point on that is sometimes when I'll talk to people about the Phoenix, and I'll mention funny things like the Phoenix is mentioned on an episode of The Simpsons, or it's the notpaper that City on a Hill created by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It's the Phoenix that they picked as, you want to stay away from that reporter. She's aggressive and we'll dig into the bottom, like things like that. Or in the movie Spotlight, in that sort of early on in the scene when Stanley Tucci character is saying to the Michael Resendez, the Globe reporter, well, I don't know why you're covering the Catholic Church thing. The Phoenix already did that. And that was true. We broke the Catholic Church scandal. And the line was also correct that immediately followed, which said the Phoenix didn't really have the money to keep digging in further, which was in fact true, but we did break that story. So it's things like that that are impactful to culture and community that connected in with sort of the formal education side. That's particularly important to me. That is a foundation of how I look at things, is through this impact on culture and society and voices, and how that intersects with content and education in the broadest and the specific sense.
There are some other questions I have around that, but just to be explicit, what are the degrees you hold?
I have a bachelor's in English. I have a MBA. I have a master's in memory theory. And then I have a doctorate in organizational behavior.
It's interesting to hear you articulate those, because your work is like a manifestation. Your commercial work is a manifestation of all those things. It's really fascinating. You don't often meet people outside of things like a doctor goes to medical school, a lawyer goes to law school, but like you actually have the academic training for what you do.
I'd love to say that was all planned, but I think it was really just a somewhat alignment of the planets in the universe. And I don't belong anywhere near a operating room or in NASA or any,
I think of it as interest and aptitude, right? Yeah, interest and aptitude coming together.
Yes, don't stray too far off the path, I suppose.
Yeah. Just to stay there for one moment, because there was something I came across sort of late in my prep for this, so I didn't get to read the articles, and I'm actually very much looking forward to. There were a few articles posted, one that you had written about Rastafarianism, one about the biker subculture, and one about the concept or notion of pre-nostalgia.
Mm.
Pre-nostalgia is interesting. It's something that actually comes up a lot in my conversation with music artists on this podcast because of the ways technologies now are behaving and the way people and artists in particular are using them to sort of blending of analog and electronic. And the way the technology, specifically of the late 70s, early 80s, you had this really interesting blend of analog and digital. The aesthetic of that era, video, audio, really resonates. There really seems to be, there's still a humanity in the machine at that point. Even if we look back at how we like some of that video looks, it resonates for people, the way the color looks. A lot of the bands of that era held up remarkably well. And it's that mixture of the first digital technology, but still being played by people. So you have like the flaws and the mistakes. It's not as perfect as what sort of came later in pure digital. And just that notion of like, this is what the future looked like back then and how it stirs something sort of, again, like nostalgic, but almost maybe for a time that didn't fully exist.
I like how you just said that, nostalgia for a time that didn't really exist. And I think it's the impact, and obviously I'm certainly fascinated with nostalgia and memory theory and emotions and how that impacts behavior and all those other types of things, is so powerful and impactful on who we are as people and members of communities and things like that. And the shaping, the early emotions, the longing, right? The nature of nostalgia is really this nature of longing. And by the way, longing that can be positive or negative. It's not that longing has to be negative. I missed out, right, in some of this concept of pre-nostalgia around the nature of missing things and making certain decisions before they become nostalgic in a way, and the nature of regret and things like that. I kind of love how you sort of tie this in with the music side of it, because even very, I want to say somewhat superficial level, the resurgence of vinyl and this, what was is again, after it wasn't. And why is that? Why this connectivity? What is going on here with it? And yes, it sounds better, and there's a gazillion reasons like that. And lots of artists, of course, are hyper advocates about it, whether it's the Jack Whites or Eric Churches or people like that. But I think there is this nature of connectivity with the medium, with the longing, with the stories, with the culture, with the community, right? There's a thing with this, right? And I think you've honed in on a piece of it. I spent a lot of time thinking about, and then you tie in with some of the other stuff that I've written, whether it's about the Rastafarian diaspora, which I'm particularly fascinated with, and cultural appropriation and cross-cutting against various sort of cultures and things like that, or subcultures like biker subculture and style and substance and language and those things, which again, they all fit in the same orbit of what we're talking about.
Like a transparency that all lays over music and music fandom in a very interesting way, which I promise we'll get to in just one more beat. But as a bit of a side road on the topic of Rasta, I've only really ever been interested as a music fan, right? And then a little bit culturally, I've read a little bit about the history of the movement and sort of, let's just say not deep, but something that I just recently came across, which I guess has been known for a while, but I hadn't heard of, was the influence of Hinduism and the Indian immigrants on the sort of development of Rasta ideology and early Rasta beliefs. It was amazing to actually see some of the parallels laid out, and whether it's the vegetarianism or the use of ganja, like it really fascinating, because the Rastas you always think of them as the lost tribe or being more rooted in Old Testament Judaism. But I don't know. Anyway, I bring that up just because it's fresh in my mind and I find it fascinating.
It is fascinating. And I think it's, for me, just as a anecdote to add to it, when I was 13 years old, I had posters of Bob Marley and Peter Tosh in my room, and I begged my parents to let me grow dreadlocks. Just the answer was no. I'm sure that's shocking to anybody. But why was that? I'm not unique. I might have been unique in wanting to grow dreadlocks when I was 13, but not unique in terms of, at a young age, embracing the music, the culture, the language, forgetting about the use of marijuana and all of that. But it's just, there's something so extraordinarily unique about reggae and Rastafarianism and how it really truly appropriated the colors just across multiple communities and cultures and individuals, regardless of race, regardless of religion. And I'm not sure there's another parallel to that hits all of those things, right?
And the strange internationalism of it too, to like be looking to have these sort of very rural people looking to like Ethiopia for their
Yes.
savior, like just fascinating. But I think to go back, even you're mentioning vinyl and the idea of pre-nostalgia, these conversations all get approached from people's expertise or very narrow vantage points, right? Like when you read about the vinyl resurgence, it's often about the commercial implication or about the collectability or this, that, and the other thing. And it really is, whether it's Rasta or vinyl or all these other subcultures, like there's a deeper resonance that I think often I can't articulate what it is. I don't have the vocabulary or the training to get at it, but there's a deeper truth, I think, that is hidden in all of these things that people are gravitating towards. Just like the 13-year-old Boston area raised white kid drawn to the music and the culture. That's happening everywhere all the time. And like, what is it that people are responding to? What are they rejecting in their upbringing? What are they attracted to in that other thing? The sociology of all of it is so powerful and interesting.
Yes. And I think the nature of why, right? And these sort of relationships, these influential relationships. My introduction, I can tell, and again, just to emphasize the point or highlight this a little bit more, my introduction to reggae came from somebody that I met at camp. He was, like me, a white Jewish kid, but he played the congas. And he had this deep understanding of not just reggae music, but Afro-Cuban music. He was my age, but he was like a performer in addition to that. And I had never touched any. I mean, I just didn't know the first thing about it. And he and I became friends and spent a lot of time together. And I learned how to play congas and I got connected to Afro-Cuban music. So I learned about bands that as a 13-year-old, I don't know how many 13-year-olds were exposed to Potato and Totico or, Fania All-Stars, but I was because of my friend Brad. And the impact, that moment in time and connecting with him and him teaching me about this, like that shaped it. Had that not happened, I'm not sure I would have written about the Rastafarian diaspora. That connective tissue started 40 years ago at just a moment. A relationship. And I think going back to some of the media stuff, what is that story or what is that song or what is that medium that influences somebody at that moment in time that literally does shape who they are? For better or for worse, by the way, right? And that's another interesting dynamic.
All of that sort of context, formal and informal training, interests and aptitude, like we talked about before, all that informs or you bring to the table for your current work. What's the spectrum on which Inveniem and Definitive Authentic sit, and how are they complementary and different?
So Inveniem really is the overarching company, and that is really for anybody who would poke around, there's very little about us on there, and that's intentional. Our whole business is based on trust, right? Very famous creators across music, sports, or entertainment, trusting us to take, in many cases, literal possession of their physical and digital artifacts and going through the archival and preservation and protection process and bringing them into some sort of order, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, so that our clients know what they have and where things are and they can make the creative decisions that they want, right? So one of the founding tenets of what we do is like this is a command of the obvious statement, but it's like you got to know what you have in order to figure out what to do with it. So that's the first step is let's pull this in, whether it's a living artist or an estate or a younger artist or more established legacy artist, it's all goes through the same process. So that is very much the intake part of this and sort of pulling these things in and bringing some order to all of this. And it's across all of these things. So it's audio and video and documents and photos and instruments and clothing, etc. Anything you would expect, there's nothing we haven't touched. And then we created Definitive for anything that would be public facing. And we wanted to keep that separate so that if you look at some of the things we put into the market publicly, whether it's for Metallica Black Box or it's Leppard Vault or it's the Cruiseum or it's Backstage with Bon Jovi, it's all powered by Definitive. We didn't really want Inveniem's name on there because Inveniem is sort of behind this wall, right? And we really don't let anybody back there. But we needed something that would be public facing. That's sort of the separator. If something is public, then that will get the definitive branding, and our certificates of authenticity that we do are under the definitive brand. And stuff where if we're working with a client and they say, look, I just want everything safe and preserved and protected and documented. I don't know what I want to do with it. So that never gets a definitive name on it because it just stays in its secure space. So that's the separation of the two. They are connected, but only when it moves from private to public.
The sort of crude analogy that comes to mind would be if Inveniem is sort of the database, there's a layer of permissions that get toggled on and off to determine what then definitive authentic can show to the world.
I think it's a great, simple and very accurate. That's exactly it.
Even hearing you say it, I don't fully grok the need for not the need, the intensity around the confidentiality. Like, why would a client care who knows that they are engaging somebody to quantify and manage their archive?
It's a really interesting question because I don't know whether for the second year, I was thinking about it, maybe they don't care, but it's not our information to share.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're not trading on their brand.
We're not trading on that. And at least in our experience, that is meaningful for these clients because they know that we start to work with XYZ client and we're not sending out a press release, say Inveniem just signed. We just don't do that. That doesn't create trust. Whereas if we say, we don't tell anybody about it, we're dealing with, in a lot of cases, our clients' really most extraordinary piece of cultural history.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On right after this break. If you enjoyed this episode of Spotlight On, please share us with a friend and leave a review or star rating on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks. And now, back to Spotlight On. To paint a little bit of a picture for listeners, in some of the artists I've worked with, I know that oftentimes, let's say we'll put in air quotes, a legacy artist, somebody that's been around 30, 40, 50, 60 years. They've got their public-facing body of work, and now we're in an era where there's box sets and reissues and deluxe editions, and there's things that come out that fans perceive as having been in the vault, which is great. From your perspective, when you go into a new client, there's not necessarily the vault. There's tapes in Iron Mountain. There's stuff under a desk in a manager's office. There might be 2 or 3 warehouses and maybe even on different continents. There's stuff in each of those places of not necessarily great chain of custody in terms of provenance, ownership, what falls under a rights deal. There might be another place where there's costumes. Somebody was an amateur photographer, so there's boxes of negatives. Like, in other words, you come in and it's not like, oh, we're just going to go to this address and everything's there and we're going to go catalog it. What's the range of, not necessarily environments you walk into, but what are the roles and services you have to provide when you're wearing just your Inveniem hat? Is there 50 people that go in and attack a project? Is it 3? Like, what's it look like?
So the short and unhelpful answer, but I won't stop there, is it depends.
I knew it.
I think in a very sort of non-marketing way to scaffold this, we're IP managers when you look at it. So what you described is this is scattered around in different places and it involves rights or it involves like deterioration there's all these variables that do factor into it. So I think the first thing is that we really will do as much or as little as the client wants. So we're not imposing our insistence on you must do it like this and you must do all these things or whatever. That's not it. It's very collaborative and it really comes down to starting with what are, I use an overused term, but best practices. We have the highest level of professionalism and amazingly trained, brilliant archivists and curators who seen and done everything with this. And it's really this kind of first thing of let's understand what we're walking into. What is the need? How do we understand that from a client's perspective? What's most important to them? What are things that are urgent? Because there very well could be, and we've seen this countless times, where you have a box of hard drives or you have a box of DAT tapes, you have whatever. And it's like, how long have you had these here? I don't know, 15 years, 18 years. It's like, okay, do you know what's on them? No. okay, right. So there's a thing where there's some immediacy, right? An urgency around simply preservation and pulling those things together. And then from there, it's everything from the fundamentals of professional archival work and inventorying and cataloging through to preservation and databasing and metadata and all of that. And then into the story gathering piece of it and the curation and valuing. And then that all leads to the content drives the creative, right? That then leads to, okay, here are some things you can consider now that you know what you have. So it's ordered and the processes are replicated over and over again, but it's also fluid because every client is different in terms of what they have and what they want.
It's so funny to hear you talk about it. I wanted to ask you, well, I'll tell you my little anecdote and then I'll ask you the question, but there's an artist I work with and there were a lot of poorly cataloged boxes of tapes at Iron Mountain. But I found a tape that I wanted to investigate, so I had to order the whole box. And they sent a box full of a bunch of tapes, and there was some interesting stuff and then some mundane stuff. But there were also random things thrown in. Like there was a crumpled up dirty T-shirt. There was an empty beer can. There was just detritus from like it was at the end of a tour or at the end of a recording session, whatever it was. Somebody just came through and was like, in the box, taped the box, and off it went to storage. And is part of the confidentiality that you're touching things that maybe nobody knows what you're going to touch. You're going to open a box and there might be something very personal or poignant. And as a sort of corollary to that, can you, without naming names, like, are there funny, strange, kooky things you've stumbled across that you were like, what the hell is this? Or how did this get in there? Oh my God, we found some important thing. Like any fun, interesting discoveries you could talk about?
Well, certainly on the discovery of like the gold types of things, like that stuff where it's, oh, here are the handwritten lyrics. Here's the demo tape. But like I could say, oh, this doesn't happen all that often, but it happens all the time. You have enough boxes and there's always something where even the client will say, where did you find this? We found it buried in a mismarked box on the bottom of a whatever. Like that sort of stuff happens all the time. And this has only happened once and it's never happened since. We did find a box that had $26,000 in cash.
Sure. I mean, especially when you think about back in the day, it's only been very recently that even like merch sales on the road went through a credit card swipe. It wasn't that long ago where everything at the T-shirt counter was tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash a night.
Right. And I don't know where the money came from, but it was one of those like, okay, it's just in a box and like there were broken picture frames. I mean, there's plenty of times when you open it up and it's like there's, garbage, but I think also very personal things, very personal. And I think that's also why we just don't talk about this stuff, because if you start with the kind of premise that clients don't know what they have, which is really almost always the case. And sometimes I'll talk to people and they'll say, how is that possible? And I'll say, do you know everything you have in your basement or your attic? Because I bet you don't. So just imagine it over a 50-year career. You definitely don't. So you start with that they don't know that they have these things, and then overlay who they are and what they've done and their journey and impact and whatever it happens to be. And there's things in there that are meaningful about various relationships or things like that, stuff that really should not see the light of day. And we just take that very seriously. There's a lot of kind of wow moments. And I think that's where we are grateful. We're humbled by that because there's an energy to a lot of these artifacts, which maybe sounds a little bit kooky, but there have been times when we sat there and just held something and you feel it. It's so weird because it is so culturally meaningful. And you're like, this is it. It's a Raiders of the Lost Ark, kind of moment in some ways.
So to go back to something you said a few minutes ago on the Inveniem side, is the business model sort of a menu of services? Like it's everything from research and archiving and cataloging to restoration services or chain of custody document. Is it basically we can do all these different things so that at the end of it, you have this actually fully articulated grasp of what you have and what you can do with it? Is Inveniem's model like a menu of services that someone can pick and choose from, and they can have as much of the service as they want?
For sure. And because everybody's different, right? And some clients will say, I just want everything safe. We saw this a lot with clients with the fires in California and some things got too close to home, like literally too close to home. So we just took everything and great, it's stored, it's safe. And we see this more with estates, but not all the time. But just as an examples is like the family just needs to get a handle on what's there. They don't know what they want to do, but they need everything organized in a way. So at least they make some decisions at some point. Great. Whereas other clients might say, I want you to go through everything I have. I want you to figure out what to do with it. And I want you to do it. So we say, okay, but it's really fluid. It's really flexible. The foundation of it is super serving our clients. That is the thing. And in an industry that isn't really known for integrity and doing what you say you will do and looking out for the artist first or whatever, we pride ourselves on that because it's the foundation of looking at authentic content and the responsibility around that of journalism and reporting and all of that. And what's the meaning behind this and connecting with audiences is that commitment to, again, as I said, super serving our client is really, I hate when people say this word, but it's like it's in our DNA.
Sure. I think another thing that maybe fans or the public don't necessarily fully understand, and there's no reason they should, but it's just the volatility of an artist or a celebrity's life and career. There's the obvious things like if you're an athlete, you move a lot between cities, or if you're a music star with any longevity in your career, you might have had drug and alcohol issues, or you just were itinerant, you were a working musician. And then you layer in things that the public doesn't necessarily see, like divorces, families breaking up, management changes. I even think down to the level below that, like how many management offices, the only way they run it all is because of assistants. And then you have such high turnover there. And one assistant managed things one way in a spreadsheet, and another manager did it a different way in a different spreadsheet, or used a notebook or Google Docs. And all of a sudden, there's boxes of stuff everywhere. Very few rock stars begin their careers by saying, let's make sure we keep everything really organized for the end of days. And it's almost shocking that we get archival releases at all because the stuff is just so dispersed, not properly cared for. It's really amazing.
I think you sort of summarized the variations with all this because it is about whether it's turnover, it's different managers, or we sent this to the label and what did the label do with it, or all those things. And it is depending on the client. And we do have some clients that may not have kept everything in order. That's an understatement. They definitely didn't keep things in order, but they just kept things in boxes, and they just kept throwing things in boxes and storage areas because they didn't know what to do. Obviously not with everything, but with good chunks of stuff. But it is following breadcrumbs and connecting the dots kind of process in a lot of ways. And clients who are trying to find that lost tape or whatever it is, or some kind of thing. And I think the other kind of seedy side of this is that people steal things.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the stuff. And we've had multiple occasions over the years where a client would see something up for auction and be very upset, and it's a former bodyguard or it's a this or whatever. And people can auction whatever they want if it's theirs. And just the discussions with the client around where they say, what do we do about this? And it's like, well, can you prove that the guy stole it? Can you prove that he didn't actually get it the way that he got it? Because if you can't, it's his. You can buy it, be the highest bidder, and you can do it, or try to make a separate deal. There's a lot of that we see, and just things that really belong in the hands of the artists that are part of the creative process that are not. And it's unpleasant.
There was an artist I worked with who, unbeknownst to the outside world, was the largest private collector of his own material and employed a part-time person who bought and sold stuff on eBay. So if the artist had 10 of something, might sell one at a time on eBay to raise funds to go buy other things, and ultimately was into things even like bootlegs, fan art, really derivative, like anything basically that people made using his image or marks, and had a massive collection. Oftentimes tried to get duplicates, tried to have 2 of everything. But it was a real thing, and it ended up being tens and tens of thousands of pieces in the collection. Really interesting the way the artist mind works.
I love that. That is unique. in
We,
every
well,
sense.
we could talk off mic a little bit about
Yes.
that. I'll give you some more color on it. But the piece I wanted to zero in on is this idea of value, because you indicated earlier when you were describing what Inveniem does that there may be like an ideation or a product development component. Like, okay, now we know what you have and we know who owns what and what you have the rights to, or who has what rights to what. Here's what you might do with it. And something I have found, and I'm curious your experience here, is that it's very difficult sometimes for the artists and their team to properly perceive the value of something, meaning they both under and overvalue. So certainly on the content side, like the art itself, the recorded media, there's often a reason why something didn't come out in the past. Fans might want it, but the artist is like, that was a working copy, or I abandoned that for a reason. Other times they're shocked at what's in there. Like, what? We recorded every show on that tour on DAT? Let's just dump it all into Spotify. That's amazing. And everything in between, throwback merchandise, authentic merchandise, not even recreating it. You have artists who, part of their merch deals, they got 10 of everything. And like you said, they all just went into boxes. And then one day you open the box and it's like, we have 10 of everything from the 1985 World Tour. Oh my God, Can you speak at all to the ranges of feedback you get? What poses the biggest challenge in terms of productizing or taking something to market?
From a value standpoint, there are some clients, and I would say this is pretty common in an interesting way, who don't understand the value because they created it. It just doesn't mean anything to them, right? Because they're like, and I've heard clients be like, why would anybody care about this? So I hear that more often than you might expect. And my answer with that is typically, I understand why you don't care, because you created it, it's yours, whatever. This is part of your life. It's who you are. It's, but fans have never seen this. Unless you put yourself in that fan's perspective, you're never going to understand the value. But as a fan, for me to see, hey, this was the album cover that was never used. This is your actual laminate from this. This is this, whatever. You don't care about it. Why would you care? You lived it. But as a fan, I've never seen it. And you're welcoming me into your world through these artifacts and the related stories that drive extraordinary value, right? And I would say most of the time when you frame it like that to a client, they then start to see it a little bit differently. They may or may not agree with you, but at least they understand their perspective and then say, okay, fine, well, you do what you think you need to do with this. There is the other part of it where clients have an unrealistic expectation of value. So they might say, well, this guitar should be worth this. And it's like, okay, should is an interesting word to use here. I would agree with you that maybe it should be, but given the particular market, it's just not. Sometimes those are challenging conversations to have with clients, but whether we do something directly or we work with an auction partner, we know everybody in that sort of space. If somebody comes back who says, oh, well, I could auction this for you, I'm just picking auction as an easy example, and we think that we'll get $1,000 for this guitar, I'm going to go back to the client and say, I can't even in good conscience recommend you try to even go down this road. It's just not worth it. Just hold on to it. Somebody says it's $1 million, maybe that's a different story and maybe that aligns with where you think it should be. But if it's low, let's just rethink what we should do with this, right? And trying to provide the right sort of guidance to protect their artifacts and their brands, right? So that's the other critical thing, is providing a comprehensive thought process around not just what you're doing, but why you're doing this. Why do you want to sell this? Or for us, being able to say to an artist, this is why we think we should do this with this particular artifact. So I think where the value discussions come into play, fans buy stories. It's not just the stuff. Something that has a unique story attached to it will drive value, will drive interest, will drive engagement. And I think for us, that's part of our archival and curation process, is like, let's understand the meaning behind this. How does this connect to other things? How does this influence? Whether something gets sold or reproduced or not, it almost doesn't matter, but you must have the story process. And it is an extensive process to go through. What we tend to say is the archival work is literal and figurative heavy lifting. Like, it really is. But you have to go through it. You have to do it. And that's why we have so many people on our team that this is what they do.
In the definitive authentic world, it seems like right now, at least in the public facing websites that you have up for artists, whether it's Motley Crue or Metallica, or those are more like exhibitions and less like gift shops, if you will.
Absolutely.
What's the business model? What's the why? Is it just like to drive engagement with the stuff? Or is it like, this is what's out there and we'll see what people are interested in. We'll start to make products. Like, where does this all go?
We're very conscious about these kind of museum experiences that we've created, whether it's for Metallica or Motley or Leppard or Bon Jovi or whomever others that are coming out, in the sense that these aren't money grabs. So it's not just come on here and buy. There's a merch site to do that. There are things that you can buy from any museum. So there's the gift shop, right? It's like exit through the gift shop. There's a few things you can buy that are created out of this material that's really unique and special and limited. And that's really the lane that we live in. So it's a combination of revenue generation and engagement with super fans, or sort of the most passionate fans, or those that want to discover things. And for the artists, we've seen the connectivity that these types of experiences, and we've done physical ones as well, but whether it's digital or physical, that just pulls fans in. The artists are showing you things that you've never seen before. Like, come in, come look at these things, comment, share, tell your friends, do all this, which is amazing for the artist. It's great for them. And it's great for the fans, because we see this across socials, can you believe that these are the handwritten lyrics, or this is the photo, or this, like, fans love it. This is fan behavior, right, at its core, right? And that's really what we're dealing with, is the nature of fan behavior. So we combine that with the opportunity for fans to own a piece of this in a way that they hadn't been able to before. It's an organic, constantly evolving thing. So it's not like, well, we launch this and then we take it down. No, this keeps going, because this does in fact connect a client's past, present, future. And that's the nature of what we do. The business model is good for the clients. It's good for us. And it's, again, sounds very sappy, but everybody wins.
There's this notion of like passive income. And this is almost like passive marketing, passive engagement. Like, if you put enough of this material out there at scale, the marketing not necessarily takes care of itself, but like the engagement drives the marketing. Like, fans will say, oh my God, like, I haven't seen this t-shirt since 1983, or wow, the backstage pass is so cool. And then they're out there showing each other, talking about it, reposting it. And the artist doesn't have to feed it constantly.
Correct. And I think the other thing is, which is really critical with that, because I think you're exactly correct, is it is authentic. And we use this word a lot inside and outside when we talk to others, but that can't be really overstated, because it is this authentic relationship between the artist and the fan that we are nurturing. And at levels that, yes, absolutely going to shows or buying the records, a critical piece of that, right? An extraordinarily critical piece, probably the most important pieces of it. But this supports all of it. And it's all for the artists and the fans. These are other playgrounds for them to live in. And it works exactly like that, is fans do share. Again, this is fan behavior, right? I love this band. I know you love this band. I got to show you this. Have you seen it? And we're just giving fans thousands and thousands of things for them to share with other fans. And it's a virtuous cycle, right? It just keeps positively feeding itself.
Yeah, we talk about this with some regularity on the podcast. I like to use the line that people forget that fan is short for fanatic. And there's a lot that is implied in that. And what does a fanatic do, right? It's emotional. It's highly engaged. You want to be first, or you want to be in the know, or there's just an intensity around a fanatic and around fandom that, if harnessed correctly, can be very exciting and productive. Now, it's also a live wire that if you touch it the wrong way, you're in a lot of trouble. It's easy to make mistakes. It really is, to activate those people the wrong way, or to alienate them, or to exploit them. But when it's all harnessed properly and fed correctly, it makes for a really dynamic environment. You know, my experience has been, not totally, but I think a vague truism is that artists don't typically like to write checks. They're much more used to getting checks. I'm wondering what that means in terms of your business model. Do you find that it's easy to get them to pay for this stuff? That's sort of question one. And 1A is whether it relates to who's willing to pay or not. Are there any discernible differences between the verticals you operate in, either the mindset of an athlete versus an artist, or the needs of a different type of celebrity?
So at first, it's interesting to use the word easy. Like it's never easy. Nothing is ever easy to get people to pay for things. But I think the difference between this is that we are not just providing this transactional thing, right? What we do has multiple benefits for a client. And the reality is that everybody has to do this at some point. It's really just a question of when. You will have to do it. It's very expensive to go backwards. So the sooner you do it, the better. And because we have models that help clients generate revenue during this process, they start to see the return on this, even just from what we're doing from a monetization side of all of it, but also the things that we do in allowing clients to see what they have and how things relate to each other in a very organized way, separate from us. Those things go into a box set. They go to a merch company. They become a documentary. They become a book. All these things that must start with this process. So the value that we bring is not a single one-to-one value. Well, if we do this and we'll create memorabilia or whatever, and then we'll sell it. And that it's really, we are giving you control over your world, over your creative legacy, however long it's been. And this is going to sound like I'm emphasizing for effect, but there's almost no price to put on that. Because if something happens and bad things happen, homes burn down and there are floods and there's whatever, that stuff is gone. We encourage our clients, and I'll say this, I'm like, do it with somebody. If you don't want to do it with us, do it with somebody internally, hire somebody to do it, because you need to have control over your things, because that will allow you peace of mind, allow you to figure out kind of what it is that you should be doing creatively, and just protect your artifacts, your history, your legacy, your stories. And again, there really is almost no value that you can put on it. And then sort of your 1A question with it is there's differences in terms of obviously the nature of the artifacts we're dealing with and some of the goals of clients, but the process is the same. And it does start from, okay, here's what you have. You may not understand that it says value. We're going to explain to you why it does. Here are the things you can do with it. Let us put it into some sort of order and then help you creatively as you like for us to, whether it's engage with fans or generate new revenue for yourself or your nonprofits or whatever it happens to be. But it's a very deeply collaborative relationship with the client, regardless of whether they're an athlete or actor or artist or brand or what have you. The results are meaningful for the client and they're meaningful for their audience.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for making time. I could do another 2 or 3 hours on all this. It's the personal and professional intersection of interests here is pretty amazing. So maybe we could talk again at some point, but thank you for making time.
I'd love to. I'm very, very grateful for you including me on here. It's great to see you again and connect with you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity and to talk across all these different areas. It really very enjoyable.
Thank you so much, Brad Mindich. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host and executive producer, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and edited by Michael Donaldson with theme music by Q Burn's Abstract Message. If you'd like to support our work, please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. There you'll find our free episode archive, weekly postings on our official blog, our online store, and a link to make a donation to support our work. As always, thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.